So my Land Cruiser has definitely not had an easy life with my ownership. It has travelled around the entire country for the course of the year and travelled to some of the most rugged and remote terrains Australia has to offer. But it's nothing quite like Cape York, with its remote location, spectacular camping, endless waterholes, and of course, hard four-wheel driving. So after completing the Old Telegraph Track for the first time in 2023, I knew it wouldn't be long before I was back down and doing it again. And that's exactly what we did earlier in 2025. Travelling here from WA, across the Great Central Road into the Red Centre, up into the Northern Territory and across into Queensland, we did a 15,000 kilometre round trip that will create memories that will last a lifetime. But it sure took its toll on the Land Cruiser as well. In today's episode, I'm going to go over some of the issues that I experienced on that trip and how you might be able to avoid them if you're heading up that way. If you follow me on social media, you might have seen a few of these in my video shorts, but let's get straight into it. Now, we did Cape York early in 2025, and when I say early in 2025, I mean we were within one of the first dozen vehicles up the OTT for the season, and the conditions definitely showed. It was rough, the water crossings were high, and it rained almost every single day we're on the track. The main gunshot drop-off hadn't been opened yet, and no one had crossed Cockatoo Creek for the season. Now, we managed to team up with a few other people we met locally to build some of the washouts and flatten out some of the tracks, but it definitely took its toll on some of our gear, and the tracks were definitely rougher than you'd generally expect. So we don't have to go very far for our first drama, which is just down here. So the first issue, which has become a pretty standard thing now for me and this particular cruiser, was a broken CV. Yep, we did another front left CV on the cruiser, which is the 9th in total between the two sides. So it's a little bit frustrating. However, with the tools that I carry and the fact that I always carry a spare axle now, we were able to fix that trackside with the little CV repair kit that I have in the back of the cruiser. What was a little frustrating though was it wasn't one particular obstacle or incident that caused it to fail. It sort of just degraded as we were heading north on the OTT, and the sounds coming from it just got worse and worse. Now, because we only carry one spare, I didn't want to change it up north while we're in the remote areas of the tip of Cape York, so we left it in case of a catastrophic failure on either side. We changed it down at Bramwell Station as we're heading south again, and so far, so good, it's still holding on just fine. The next issue we had were not one, but two significantly damaged tyres. Now, regular viewers may know that I only carry one spare on the back of my Land Cruiser, and although in this case it didn't leave us stranded, it definitely made us change our plans in order to order a replacement before heading back across the country again. The first issue we experienced was in some station country in the southwest area of the Cape. A few days earlier, I had noticed a pretty decent cut in the sidewall of this rear right tyre here, but realistically, there wasn't anything I could do to try and prevent or maintain that from developing any further. Regardless, we crossed the river crossing in that southwest area, and we came out the other side with a completely flat tyre as a result of that sidewall failing. Now, maybe I just had high hopes and wanted to give it a go anyway, but I did try and stick some plugs in there, but there was no way it was going to stop the leak. If only I had some glue tread back then. Either way, it was off with the old, on with the spare, and we continued on, although a little bit more cautious now with no spare and still in a very remote area of the Cape. Now, so this is where we ran into a little bit of an issue. Because we were so far west of the Cape, we wanted to continue that way to head back into the NT to get to the eventual destination of Alice Springs. However, we couldn't find anywhere in the area that stocked a 35 by 12.5 by 18-inch tyre, which meant that we had to change our plans a fair bit and head all the way back to the east coast again to Cairns to find that spare tyre and get it fitted. So it did change our plans up a fair bit, but it wasn't all bad. We ended up spending a few nights in Cairns exploring the area and even went for a bit of a bungee jump. Still not sure how I feel about that though. So fast forward a couple of weeks and we're traveling about 100 kilometers east of Laverton in Western Australia. We're almost home and we had a pretty catastrophic failure in the rear left tyre here. It blew out at 100 kilometers an hour, the sidewall gave way, caused a fair bit of damage to the tyre itself, but fortunately it didn't cause much damage, or any damage at all, thankfully, to the back of the cruiser. Now, there is no amount of plugs or glue tread that was going to solve that one, so it was off with that and on with the spare that we had arranged with Cairns, thank goodness. However, this is where I ran into a bit of an issue. Turns out I hadn't actually changed a rear tyre on the back of the cruiser with the equipment I had in the cruiser with these new 35-inch tyres fitted, and it soon became evident that the little bottle jack I had wasn't going to be enough. Now, fortunately, I was able to use a chainsaw that I had to cut down a stump from a dead tree nearby, use that to lift the jack up, lower the axle onto the stump, then build the jack up, lift it up again, and we're able to get enough clearance there. But it was definitely a humbling experience, and I've since ordered some new equipment to make sure that won't happen again. In sticking with this rear left corner of the Cruiser, brings us onto the third issue that we experienced on this trip, and that was a blow-in shock absorber. While I was in Cairns waiting for the new tyre, we did a bit of an inspection around the vehicle just to make sure everything was all right, and it didn't take much to observe. There's a fair bit of fluid on the ground and around this wheel arch in the back left. Upon closer inspection, it was pretty clear that the lines between the shock absorber and the remote reservoir had become compromised. We'd lost all our gas and all the fluid out of it, and it was essentially doing nothing for the vehicle. What had happened, and the reason that had happened, is because the remote reservoir had come loose or had broken from its bracket at some point along the track and had decided to hang down. Once it was hanging down, it became damaged and we lost all that fluid. Now, some of you might remember I had the suspension fitted at Dobinson's Adelaide only last year and had these rear shocks revalved to suit the weight of the Cruiser. So I got onto Danny from Dobinson's on a Saturday morning and he got straight onto it. And when I say straight onto it, I mean straight onto it. He went into the workshop on a Saturday, revalved a new shock for me and had it sent to Alice Springs ready for fitment when we were going to get there a few days later. So I was very, very appreciative and impressed with the level of service there. A couple of days later, we did get into Alice. We had the shock fitted and no dramas. But I can tell you what, you don't realize just how much a shock absorber does. Even 1 out of 4 on a smooth road until you have one that's not working. It definitely doesn't make the vehicle handle any better, that's for sure. Moving on to the next issue, which was steering. At some point during the adventures we had on the Cape, we had knocked the steering in this Cruiser way out of alignment. And I mean, it was way out. Between our drive between Cairns and Alice Springs, the vehicle was handling terribly. It was swaying, wallowing, and drifting in its lane. It was extremely fatiguing to drive, particularly compared to how it normally drives, which is really, really nicely. Now, one of the consequences of this was some steering shudder. It's not shuddering like death wobbles or anything, but there was quite a bit of shuddering on a high traction surface, being the tarmac, for most of that drive, that was coming through the steering wheel. And I thought I could deal with this given the fact we were going to Alice Springs where we could get some alignment work done, but unfortunately I was wrong. So during the 1,500 kilometers of steering shudder we experienced on that high traction surface between Cairns and Alice Springs, it put a lot of pressure on the front suspension component, more specifically the upper control arms. Now, the reason the Alice Springs guys couldn't correctly align this vehicle then and there was because we actually did some damage to the upper control arms. Well, not the upper control arms specifically themselves, but the bolt that attaches them to the back of the coil tower through a sleeve. What's happened, or what appears to have happened in this front left-hand side, is that shuttering has actually elongated the sleeve just a little bit, which has created a bit of play in that bolt that attaches the arm to the back of that coil tower. So it's making a bit of a knocking sound that it probably shouldn't be making. So not only did I have steering issues, but I had unbalanced tyres, and now I had some structural issues with that upper control arm as well. The vehicle was really, really not handling well at all. But since getting back, I have had the vehicle serviced and looked over. We've put a new bolt in that attaches that control arm to the back of that sleeve. Now, although we haven't directly fixed that elongated sleeve, it has made it a lot better. And the reason we haven't fixed it is because there really isn't much of a quick and easy fix. Given the location of that sleeve and how precisely it has to be located in there, it's probably going to be an engine out job. So we're going to see how this holds up for now. It is holding up at the moment. There's not much play, but it's one of those things we're just going to have to monitor as we go. So this brings us on to the next issue, which is of course the front tyres themselves. Given the fact that we had steering issues, unbalanced tyres from the fall driving, and of course that UCA issue, the tyres themselves had no chance of holding up. Now, they didn't blow out or have any structural issues, but of course the alignment being so far out caused the tread to wear down in very uneven and very quickly as well. So the insides of both of these front tyres are well and truly past the point of being effective and very much due for replacement. So fortunately, I do have 4 Kenda rugged terrains ready to stick on the Cruiser in just a couple of weeks now that we finally have that UCA issue sorted, and I'm sure they will handle very well. So moving on and onto our next issue, which is back on the front left again. This time it's not a CV, but it is brake related. Upon getting back from Cape York, I had the vehicle serviced and inspected, and the front brakes were worn once again. And I say that because this will be the 3rd set of rotors that I'm running on this Cruiser now. Now, I understand it's a very heavy vehicle. We've got modifications like 35s, and we drive it in muddy and dusty terrains, which is going to accelerate the wear on here. But in addition to having the new brakes and rotors fitted, the damage extended past just this as well. Upon inspection and putting these new parts in, we also noticed that one of the pistons inside the front brake caliper here had cracked and actually seized up in the housing, so it was done. So in addition to new pads, new rotors, I was up for a new caliper as well. The reason it's particularly frustrating is that this is the third brake caliper on this front left. I don't know why I've damaged so many. I'm not sure why it's always this left one, but I'm really hoping that this one is going to hold up a little bit longer. And so finally, fortunately, the last bit of damage is only cosmetic, and that is the bumper just down here has been torn. During the crossing of Canal Creek, we did get stuck in some very clayey mud and had to do a bit of a winch out, and obviously at some point the rear bar's been caught on something and it's torn that plastic apart. But I will say that I'm pretty impressed with this stock bar. It's one of the very few times that it's actually been caught up on anything, and considering what I've put this vehicle through, it's actually in pretty decent condition. Well, it was before this anyway. It's not a big deal, it's cosmetic, I'm not too worried about it. For the time being, I'm just going to cable tie it back into place, but rather than referring to it as damage, I might call it a bit more of a character line that has a bit of a story to tell. Now, not that you'd really refer to it as damage, but the old trusty factory side steps on the Cruiser are copping an absolute bashing. To be honest, it's something I've never really got around to replacing, and how they're still present and still on the side of the vehicle is beyond me. But of course, they copped an absolute hiding on the old Teletrack, and with some careful persuasion, they're back into a somewhat straight line, depending on what angle you look at them. But they're still there and still doing their job. Now, of course, we also went through a fuel filter in the Cruiser as well. Definitely not damage, more of routine maintenance, but it is a reminder that you should always carry one. I carry two in the Cruiser. It's about a 10-minute job to change at trackside and just keeps the car happy. Otherwise, we managed to get there and back without the assistance of a tilt tray or a tow, so we've got to be happy with that. There we have it. If you drive across the continent of Australia in a heavy modified Toyota LandCruiser, take it down some tough tracks, particularly very early in the season before the majority of most do, well, then you might have a repair bill to match. Look, all in all, these things really don't annoy me. We build these cars for a particular reason and then we go out and use them. We expect a lot from them, and realistically, they do hold up to quite a lot. And sometimes those unexpected plans or the unexpected choices we have to make to get things sorted bring some positives along with it. They do say that the adventure is in a journey, not necessarily a destination, and I think our trip to Cape York, we got the best of both. But there we have it. The Cruiser is almost fixed. It hasn't had a tank of fuel in almost 3 months since we returned, but here's hoping once we have that steering issue fixed, the new tyres fitted, we'll be back on the road comfortably again. But thank you all for watching all the way to the end. I appreciate it, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.